Montana Territory, August 1879. The sun was just starting to rise over the Bitterroot Mountains when Kade Mercer swung down from his saddle and stared at the smoke curling up from the chimney of the old Nolan ranch. He had not been back in 5 years, had sworn he never would be again, but something in the letter had pulled him north. Bride needs escort, 2 kids, no family, urgent. He had tried to ignore it, tossed it aside. But that name Nolan kept ringing around in his head like a hammer against steel. The man who had sent it, the Reverend from Deer Creek, had scribbled one last line. "She is braver than she has to be. You'll understand when you see her." Kade muttered under his breath and pushed through the gate. His boots crunched over dry earth as he passed the corral, the barn, the apple tree that was barely hanging on. Then the front door opened, and everything inside Kade stopped. She stood there with a rifle in her hands and a look in her eyes that said she had no more time left to waste. Her name was Grace Nolan. She wore a faded blue dress, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her dark hair was tied back with a strip of calico. Her face was sun-kissed and strong, but her eyes, those were something else. They held the kind of hurt that did not get spoken out loud. "You Kade Mercer?" she asked. "I am," he said, tipping his hat. "You came, you sent for me. I sent for someone who would not scare easy." "You got him." She lowered the rifle. "I have 2 children. Their names are Abby and Amos. They are not mine by blood, but they are mine now. Their parents died this spring. Fever hit fast, and I was the only one left standing." He looked past her. Inside, a girl around 8 clutched a doll to her chest and peeked out from behind the doorframe. A little boy, maybe 6, sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing lines in the dust with a stick. "I was supposed to marry their father," Grace said, voice steady. "He was my friend, nothing more than that. We made a plan to keep the land together. But now he is gone, and folks are starting to talk like I have no business raising someone else's children on someone else's homestead." "Let them talk," Kade said. She did not smile. "You do not understand. I cannot protect them alone. Someone tried to take Amos last week, said I had no right to keep him. I need someone who can ride with us to Fort Benton. There is a judge there who can sign the papers to make them mine legally. I need someone who will not let them be taken." Kade looked at her, really looked. She was not trembling, she was not begging. She was standing like a woman who had already made peace with being alone, but she had called anyway. "I will get you there," he said, "and after, I will get you back." Her shoulders dropped just a little. "We leave at first light." "It is a 4-day ride. The Reverend said you knew these trails." "I do." She looked like she wanted to say more, but the little girl came out and pressed close to her side. "Mama," she whispered. Grace reached down and ran a hand over the girl's hair. "It is all right, Abby. This is Mr. Mercer. He is going to help us." Kade crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "You can call me Kade." The girl nodded once, small and serious. That night Kade slept out by the barn. He did not ask to come inside. Grace did not offer. But as the stars turned overhead and the wind whispered through the trees, he kept his eyes on the house and his hand near his rifle. He did not sleep much. The next morning they rode out. Grace packed light blankets, flour, jerky, water skins. The children rode double with her on the mule she had borrowed from a neighbor. Kade led the way on his horse, carving a path through the hills with a sure hand. The first day passed quiet. The children did not speak much. Grace only asked once where they were. Kade pointed toward the line of trees where the land dipped into a ravine. "We camp there tonight. Water shelter." She nodded. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the crickets started to sing, they stopped near a creek. Abby helped gather firewood. Amos caught a frog and let it go with a giggle. Grace cooked a small pot of beans over the fire, and Kade kept watch from a nearby rock. When the children were asleep, she brought him a tin cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said, sitting beside him. "For what?" "For coming." He looked at her. Her face was turned to the firelight, soft and tired. "I do not make a habit of rescuing strangers. I am not asking you to rescue me, I know." She was quiet for a long moment. "Then you do not talk much." "Used to, not anymore." She glanced at him. "Why?" He hesitated. Then said, "I was married once. She died, took our son with her." Grace's breath caught. "I am sorry," he nodded. "Me too." She stared into the fire. "I was engaged once. He was kind. He made me laugh. But I never loved him." She looked at him then, and for the first time, Kade saw something flicker behind her eyes that was not fear or sorrow. It was hope. They rode again the next day, and the trail got harder. Storm clouds rolled in by noon, and by dusk, the rain came down in sharp sheets. They found shelter under a rock ledge. Grace wrapped the children in blankets and held them close. Kade built a fire, his shirt soaked, hands shaking from the cold. She looked at him through the smoke. "You are freezing." "I am fine." "No, you are not." She stood cross to him and pressed a dry blanket into his arms. Her hands lingered a moment too long. Their eyes met. "I am not used to someone looking out for me," he said. "Well," she whispered, "maybe you should get used to it." That night he did not sleep outside. There was not enough room beneath the overhang. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. The children curled together on the other side of the fire. He did not say a word. But her presence settled something in him that had been broken for a long time. The third day, trouble came. They were cutting through a narrow pass when a man stepped out with a rifle. He was lean, mean-eyed, and looked like he had not washed in weeks. "You Grace Nolan?" he asked. Grace pulled her horse to a stop. "I am. That boy ain't yours. Got a paper from the sheriff, says he belongs to the state now." Kade moved before the man finished talking. He had his gun drawn and aimed steady. "You are not taking him." The man sneered. "You Mercer?" "I am. That figures. You want to test me, go ahead." The man looked between them, then at the children, then back at Cade's gun. After a long pause, he stepped back and spit in the dirt. Not worth it. He vanished into the trees. Grace's hands were shaking. Kade holstered his gun and turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "You are brave," he said. "I am terrified." He reached over and placed his hand on hers. "Still brave." She did not let go. That night they camped near Fort Benton. The judge was half a day's ride away. The children fell asleep early, worn out from the fear and the miles. Grace sat beside him again. This time she leaned her head against his shoulder. "I never thought anyone would stay," she whispered. "I never thought someone would fight for us." Kade turned to her. "I was done with love. Then I saw you." She did not speak, but her hand found his and she laced their fingers together. He held on like it meant something, because it did. They reached the edge of Fort Benton just after mid-morning, the Missouri River glinting below a sky gone pale with summer heat. The children rode quiet, Abby tracing her fingers along the mule's mane, Amos leaning forward, his chin tucked down like he wanted to disappear inside his coat. Kade slowed his horse beside Grace's mule. "You know the judge's name?" "Wendell Carter," she said, her voice low. "He came through Deer Creek once, spoke at the church. The Reverend said he'd remember me." Kade nodded and led them past the ferry landing, where steamboat workers hauled crates up from the docks. The town was busier than he liked: traders, drovers, women in wide skirts walking with purpose. The noise seemed to press in around Grace, but she didn't flinch. She rode steady, one hand on Amos's back. They stopped outside the courthouse, a square brick building with a sagging porch and a cracked bell hanging above the door. The clerk inside directed them to the judge's quarters behind the post office. Grace dismounted first. "Stay with them?" "I will," Kade said. She hesitated, then reached back and touched Abby's cheek. "I'll be back soon." Kade watched her walk away, her spine straight, her chin lifted. She disappeared around the corner without looking back. Abby climbed into his lap without asking. Amos sat on the stoop, kicking dust. Neither said a word. After a long while, Amos spoke. "You gonna go too?" "No," Kade said. "I stay where I'm needed." The boy nodded once. They waited nearly an hour before Grace returned with a folded paper in her hands. She looked different, tired, but lighter somehow. "It's done," she said, kneeling in front of them. She held out the paper. "This says you're mine now. If anyone says different, we show them this." Abby leaned into her, and Amos looked at the paper like it was a shield. Kade stood. "Ready to go?" She brushed a curl from her forehead. Yes, they didn't linger in town. Grace wanted distance between them and the courthouse before nightfall. By late afternoon, they'd made it to the cottonwoods near the high ridge, and Kade spotted a half-collapsed trapper's cabin off the trail. The walls were leaning, but the roof still held. They made camp inside. The children curled up in the corner with the blankets. Grace sat near the doorway, her hands folded in her lap. Kade brought her a tin of trout he'd traded for in town. She took it, opened it, and ate slowly. "When you lost them," she said finally, How did you keep going? He didn't answer right away. The wind outside shifted the door against its hinges. I didn't, he said. Not for a while. I drifted, took work where I could find it, didn't speak unless I had to. Grace looked up at him through the gloom. Then why'd you come when I called? I don't know, he said. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to lose someone and not be able to stop it. Maybe because I got tired of walking away from people who still had some fight left. She set the tin down. I didn't expect you to stay after we got the papers. I didn't expect to want to. They sat quiet, the fire burning low. Then she said, I never thought I'd raise children. I used to want to teach. I had books before the fever. I taught Abby her letters last winter by lamplight. His voice was softer now. What about Amos? He won't sit still for more than a minute, but he listens. He knows more than he lets on. Kade leaned back against the wall. You'd be good at teaching. She smiled faintly. I don't know if there's time for dreams anymore. There is if you make it. She looked at him for a long moment. Have you ever thought about starting over? I stopped believing I could. And now, he reached out and touched her wrist just lightly. Now I'm thinking maybe I was wrong. That night, rain tapped the roof and the cabin smelled of damp wood and ash. Grace moved her bedding closer to his, not touching but near. He didn't sleep, not really. He listened to her breathing and watched the fire fade to coals. By morning, the sky had cleared and the world felt washed clean. They rode out with the sun behind them, the trail winding east toward home. The children laughed as they chased grasshoppers through the tall grass during one rest stop, and Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, a new kind of ease in her shoulders. Kade came to stand beside her. When we get back, what'll you do? Put up new fencing, get the winter stores in. And try to give them something that feels like a future, he nodded. You'll need help, she turned to him. You offering? I'm not much for settling down, he said, but I could build a fence. She studied him, quiet. You ever plan on leaving again? She asked. Not if I've got a reason to stay. Her gaze didn't waver. Then maybe I'll give you one. He took her hand then, rough palm against hers. No promises, no declarations, just the beginning of something that could last. The slope behind the Nolan homestead held the last of summer's warmth. Grass swayed in muted waves, bleached gold and brittle from weeks without rain. Kade stood near the fence line, hammer in hand, watching the sun sink behind the ridge. His shirt clung damp to his back, the final post driven deep into the rocky soil. Grace was down in the garden, sleeves rolled to her shoulders, coaxing the vines of late squash to stay upright with bits of twine she'd cut from an old feed sack. From the porch, Amos called out, There's a wagon coming. Kade dropped the hammer and turned. Grace straightened, shading her eyes. A single cart creaked up the lane, drawn by a pair of tired bays. A man in a black coat sat on the bench, hat pulled low. Dust coated his shoulders. Grace wiped her hands on her skirt. That's Sheriff Pratt. He waited until the wagon rolled to a stop, then stepped down. Miss Nolan, he said, nodding once. Mr. Mercer. Kade stayed quiet. The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his coat. I came to say it's settled. Judge Carter filed the guardianship with the county. No one's got a claim left to make. Grace's breath left her steady, but her hands didn't unclench. More than that, the sheriff went on. Word's gone around about what happened on the trail. That man who tried to take the boy, he was paid off by a cousin of the boy's mother. Fella's hiding out near Fort Shaw now. Reckon he won't come sniffing around again. Grace's jaw tightened, and if he does, the sheriff looked her full in the face, then he'll answer to this county. You did right, Grace. You held your ground. He tipped his hat and climbed back into the wagon. As it rolled away, Kade turned toward her. You shaking? He asked. No, she said. Just breathing different. That evening, she came to the barn where Kade was oiling the saddle straps. The air inside smelled of dust and leather, sun-warmed wood settling in slow creaks above them. She leaned against the stall, watching his hands. I've been thinking about building a schoolhouse. He looked up. Here, not far, there used to be one 10 miles west, but it burned 2 winters ago. I could teach the children here. Mine and anyone else's who's willing to ride in. You'll need lumber, he said, and help setting the frame. I know, she said. Would you stay if I started it? He rubbed the cloth along the stirrup. You asking for the work? No, she said. I'm asking if you want to be part of it. He set the strap down. I've spent years riding from place to place, never wanted to plant roots. But this, he looked at her, her face half lit by the lantern swinging from the beam, this feels like something worth staying for. She came closer, slow and certain. I keep thinking about that night in the cabin, she said, how we sat so close and didn't move. Not because we were afraid, but because it felt like we didn't have to rush toward anything. It did, he said, still does. She touched his chest, fingers resting over his shirt. I don't want to be alone anymore. You're not, he said. Outside, a breeze stirred the cottonwoods. Inside, the barn held stillness. He cupped her face gently, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I want to build this with you, not just the schoolhouse, all of it. She leaned into him. Then let's start. They didn't kiss then, not yet. But they stood there a long time, close enough to feel the weight of what they were choosing. The next morning, Kade hitched the wagon and rode into Deer Creek for timber. Grace stayed behind, drawing rough plans on the back of a flour sack. Amos and Abby helped, tracing crooked lines with charcoal. She laughed once, a full sound, one Kade had never heard from her before. It carried out across the fields when he returned, and he stood by the gate, listening. That night, the four of them sat on the porch steps, watching the first stars come out. Abby rested her head in Grace's lap. Amos leaned against Kade's side. Grace reached for Kade's hand. You're part of this now. He didn't answer right away, then quietly, I know. She turned to him, her voice soft but sure. I never wanted a man to save me. I just wanted someone who'd stay when it got hard. I stayed, he said. And I'm not going anywhere. This time, when he kissed her, it was slow and steady and full of everything they hadn't said. Her hand curled behind his neck, and she didn't pull away. When they parted, her eyes were damp, but her smile was strong. I'm glad I asked for you, she whispered. I'm glad you did too, he said. And for the first time in a long time, Kade felt like he'd come home. The first frost came early. Kade noticed it before dawn while hauling water from the creek, the way the grass along the bank turned silver beneath his boots, brittle as spun glass. The air had the bite of late October, and the horse's breath rose in plumes as he passed the corral. He glanced back toward the house, its windows still dark, smoke just beginning to thread from the chimney. Inside, Grace was pulling the last of the summer quilts from the trunk at the foot of the bed. She folded them once, carefully, and laid them over the children where they slept on the pallet by the hearth. Then she stood, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch with her hair still unbraided. Kade met her at the steps. Frost's here, he said. She nodded. I felt it in my knees before I opened the door. There's no keeping it out now. They walked the field line before breakfast, marking which rows of squash could still be pulled and which had gone soft in the cold. Grace carried a basket on one hip. Kade ran one hand along the fence rail as they moved. He noticed how her gait had changed slower, more deliberate, a stiffness in her right leg she hadn't mentioned. Did you fall? He asked. No, she said. It's just an old break that never healed straight, hit wrong in a wagon years back. It aches when the air turns. He let that settle. You ever think about going south? He asked after a while. Winters would be easier. I used to, she said, but I don't want to run just because something's hard. They gathered what they could and returned to the house. The children were up by then, Amos sitting cross-legged on the floor, mending a tear in his wool socks with thread too thick for the needle. Abby was grinding dried corn in the mortar, her little elbows working like pistons. Grace crouched beside him. If you loop it twice before pulling through, it'll hold better. Amos tried again, slower this time. Kade leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He takes after you. Grace didn't look up. He takes after someone who never gave up on him. Later that afternoon, Kade rode to the edge of the Nolan property and watched the neighbor's wagon crest the ridge. A girl no older than Abby sat beside her father, arms wrapped around a bundle of books. They'd come from a homestead almost 20 miles off. When the schoolhouse was finished, Grace had promised to begin lessons by first thaw. Word had spread. Kade helped unload the lumber they brought. As they worked, the neighbor mentioned a man in town offering to sell cut stone cheap, left over from a failed granary. You could use it for the chimney, he said. If you're planning to heat the place come January, Kade nodded. We are. That night, he told Grace about the stone. It'll take more hauling, he said, but it'll hold heat better than what we've got. She sat at the table, mending the hem of one of Abby's sleeves. Then we'll do it. You don't have to take on all of this, he said. The teaching, the building. You've already given them more than most would. She set the needle down. I was raised by a woman who couldn't read her own name. She used to say not knowing made her smaller in the world. I won't let these children feel small. Kade pulled a chair beside her. You ever wish for something you never said out loud? She met his eyes. Every day I lived in Deer Creek. He reached for her hand. Tell me now. She hesitated, then said, I used to dream of a home where no one left. Where the roof held through every storm and no one raised their voice unless they were singing. I didn't think it was real. He laced his fingers through hers. It is. She leaned her forehead against his, and they sat that way until the fire burned low and the children were fast asleep. The following week, Kade made the trip to town for the stone. He loaded it by hand, the work slow and punishing, but it gave him time to think. He returned 3 days later, arms raw, hands blistered, but with enough to build the chimney twice over. Grace stood waiting in the yard, apron dusted with flour, hair braided tight against the wind. You didn't have to do it alone, she said. I didn't want to miss my chance to come back and see you standing here. She stepped down from the porch and wrapped her arms around him, her cheek against his chest. I don't want to wonder anymore, she said, about what might go wrong. About whether you'll stay when the frost gets deeper. He pressed his lips to her hair. You won't have to. And when he kissed her, it was not the beginning anymore. It was the middle, the part where things hold fast, where the roots are already planted, and the cold can come if it wants, because what they'd built was made to last. The schoolhouse rose slowly, board by board. Each morning, Kade and Grace worked side by side, their sleeves rolled, palms blistered, breath white in the crisp air. The frame stood solid now, roof nearly finished, with windows salvaged from a collapsed homestead near the river. Abby had painted the shutters a pale green with leftover milk paint, and Amos had carved a crooked sunburst into the lintel above the door. By late November, the wind cut sharper through the valley, and the days shortened to a narrow stretch of light between chores. The children shared lessons by lamplight at the kitchen table, while Grace marked slates with chalk she'd traveled 2 towns over to find. Kade kept a ledger in the barn, tracking each family who'd promised to send their young ones once the doors opened. One morning, as Kade fed the horses, he found Grace in the hayloft sorting through a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a stack of letters and a small wool bonnet, its edge frayed. I thought I'd lost these, she said, not looking up. They were Sarah's. Amos's mother. Kade sat on the edge of a hay bale, watching her fingers move across the fabric. You kept them all this time. She was the first person who made me feel like I wasn't just passing through. We weren't kin, but she treated me like one. She paused. I wasn't sure I had the right to keep them after she died. You raised her children, Kade said. You didn't do it out of duty. You chose them. That makes it yours. Grace folded the bonnet and set it aside. I keep wondering if she'd have been proud. She'd have wept with relief to see how safe they are now. Grace turned then, and the look in her eyes was quiet and open, the kind that didn't need words. That night after supper, Grace opened the cedar chest by her bed and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were 2 gold bands, plain but well kept. She held them in her palm and offered one to Kade. My mother gave them to me when I turned 17, she said. Told me to wait for someone I could build something with. Kade took the ring, running his thumb over the edge. I don't want a preacher or papers, I want you. Every day, every frost and flood, Grace nodded. Then that's what we'll have. They didn't tell the county, they didn't need to. The next Sunday, they stood beneath the cottonwood by the creek. Abby wore her best muslin dress with blue ribbons in her braids. Amos held a sprig of winter sage he'd picked from the fence line. Grace wore the same calico she'd worn the first day Kade arrived, though the fabric had been mended and the sleeves taken in. The Reverend spoke only a few words. Grace and Kade said even fewer. But when they joined hands, something in the wind stilled. That winter, the snow came deep and early. The children spent afternoons reading aloud beside the stove while the wind howled outside. Kade built sleds from scrap lumber, and taught Amos to track rabbits along the edge of the woods. Grace started each morning with her ledger, planning lessons and making lists of who needed shoes or winter coats. One night, as the fire burned low, Kade traced his fingers along the curve of Grace's spine, her head tucked beneath his chin. "You ever think about more?" he asked. "More, another child, one that's ours." She was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think I wasn't meant to be a mother. Then I looked at Abby's handwriting last week and realized she writes just like me." He smiled against her temple. "Then maybe we're doing something right." In early spring, when the thaw began, Grace woke before dawn and sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers pressed to her wrist. Kade stirred. "You all right?" She looked back at him, her eyes wide. I think we're expecting." He reached for her hand. "You sure?" "I've been late before," she said. "But not like this, and I feel it. Like something alive already." Kade didn't speak. He just pulled her against him and held her, his palms spread across her belly as if he could already feel the shape of the life forming there. By the time the schoolhouse opened, the valley had turned green again. Families came from as far as 30 miles. Children with sunburned noses and calloused palms filled the benches Grace had varnished by hand. Abby recited a poem on the first day, her voice sure. Amos passed out slates and lined up the youngest ones by the hearth. After the children left, Grace leaned against the doorframe, one hand resting over the soft curve beneath her apron. Kade swept the last of the chalk dust from the floor. "You built this." "We did," she said. He crossed the room and kissed her gently, his hand cupping her cheek. "Grace Mercer," he said, "I never thought I'd find something that made me feel whole again." She smiled, tired and radiant. "You didn't find it. You made it." And he knew then, without doubt or fear, that whatever came next, be it storms or hard winters or sleepless nights, they would meet it together. Not just as husband and wife, but as something deeper. A family carved from hardship, held fast by love that had taken root slow and true. The child came in early autumn, a girl born in the quiet hours before dawn. Grace held her close to her chest while Abby and Amos waited just outside the door, their backs straight, their eyes wide with wonder. "She's got your mouth," Kade whispered, "and your stubborn chin." Grace laughed softly. "Then she'll be just fine." They named her Clara after Grace's mother and wrapped her in the quilt Abby had sewn from old shirts and flour sacks. That winter, the house felt smaller, warmer. The schoolhouse bustled with voices and chalk and the smell of ink. And every evening, when the sun dipped low and the smoke curled from the chimney, Kade and Grace sat on the porch steps, Clara asleep in Grace's arms, the others tucked safe inside. They didn't speak much on those nights. They didn't have to. They'd made their life, not from ease or luck, but from the hard-earned courage of staying, and they would never walk alone again.